Alright friends, welcome back for a little bit of a discussion on Dominions 5 strategy. And what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be doing, well, it's a prelude to a new Dominions project. So recently I saw, and I will link in the description of this video, a relatively new Dominions 5 YouTubers put up a tier list of strongest to weakest nation for the early age. I looked at that and I thought it was a really good project. Dominions 5 has a lot of nations, all of which are, well, most of which are very unique. Some are generic, but most have very unique mechanics. They play quite differently. And because of the levels of asymmetry involved, tiering and ranking nations is quite difficult in Dominions, I think at least. So tiering them is quite a project. If you've watched anything that I've put up, you probably understand that when I commit to do something, I probably want to have some serious evidence behind it, because part of the goal is to create discussion and but while having a basis to stand on. So I'm putting together sort of an index of the various factors that matter for a nation, how I'll rank them. Those will give me a numeric response, and that'll help me as a person rank nations in the Middle Age is my first project, and then maybe I'll do the later age if that one's popular as well. So trying to bring a sort of a systemic approach to what is essentially a qualitative analysis of these nations. So that's fine. That's a big project though. I'm still working on that. I thought what I would do today as a bit of a prelude would be to give my top 3, bottom 3 nations in Dominions 5. The reason I'm doing this is because if this causes a huge amount of controversy, then the way I'm rating nations probably needs to be revisited before I go and spend my time rating all of these nations, for example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us through what I see as the top 3 nations, plus one honourable mention that I want to talk about. Maybe 2 honourable mentions, we'll see, for the top nations. We'll then talk about the bottom nations. One comment before I get into this is that being a top nation in Dominions, to me, according to this ranking, does not mean you are most likely to win the game. Because a lot of these nations are so freaking strong, they have so many inherent capabilities that playing them is like a red flag to a bull for everyone that borders you. If you are playing some of these nations, with possibly one exception to the first 2 I'll give you, there is a tremendous incentive on people to rush you down, and even then there is an incentive for the third one. It's just painful to do so. Which means that these nations may not win statistically more games. We don't have perfect data on every game that Dominions has played, and playing a strong, in inverted commas, nations might just get you killed, and sometimes it's the person who can hide and diplo all the way through to the end that's going to pull out the game, even if they're playing a weaker country. So with no further ado, and no particular order, I'm going to jump around and I'm going to show off what I think are the 3 most powerful nations in Dominions, talk about why, and then I'm going to talk about what I think are basically the trash of Dominions. When people think of undead hordes, often they think of Lemur. They think of the zombie apocalypse nation that dom kills population, spawns tremendous amounts of long deads, and runs you over with their undead sacreds and hordes of chaff. Lemur are rookies. In the lore of Dominions, in fact, when Lemur rises up, it fights against a number of other factions. That includes Ulm and Marignan, but it also includes the forces at the Campus Stellaris, who are the living central original Lemurian faction in the Middle Age of Dominions 5. And Scalability is an absolute freaking powerhouse. Let's talk about why that's so. What makes this nation strong in a nutshell? And this is the only time probably the only time I'm not going to have to go to the map in order to demonstrate it. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the thing that most people know about Scalability. Scalability has a scalable ability to produce horrific numbers of permanent long dead and undead soldiers for basically nothing. The Scalarian cultist is recruitable with only a temple, so you can build them in forts without labs, which is an infrastructure saving, so you can segregate your forts that produce mages from your forts that only produce cultists. You can get 2 to 3 of them per turn, depending on how many CP your fort is, and then each of them will reanimate a number of long dead per turn depending on what you're putting out. At 45 gold and sacred, their upkeep is only 18 gold a year, which means you're paying less than a gold per skeleton that you reanimate, which when you consider the reanimate spell costs death gems ordinarily, this is just about the most, in fact I think it is the most efficient reanimation in the game. If you compare and contrast it with Lemur, unlike Lemur, which actually burns out your population as the price to pay. Solarian cultists are much more sustainable and they're much more scalable. One factor to give a little bit away that I see in nations that are very powerful in dominions that fit into my top 3, and it's why I decided on top 3 rather than top 5, is scalability. You need a mechanic which lets you win harder and get more insane as the game goes on. An ordinary game of Dominions has nations experience a bit of a power spike and then plateau as the number of gems on the map is what it is. Your gold income is increasingly eaten up by upkeep, and the ordinary economy starts to crunch down. Blood is one way to get around that, and scale mechanics are another way to get around that, and the Scalarian Cultist is one of the best scale mechanics in the game. Because of the Scalarian Cultist, you will never lack for siege strength, you will never lack for chaff, you can go underwater in horrific numbers, and you can just pump out tremendous number of mages. And because the Scalarian Cultist is sacred, you can take an undead leadership bless, and these guys can become your undead taxis. That one unit catapults Scalaria to the top by giving it scalability. But the other things that make Scalaria special is that unlike, say, Lemur, again, to keep harping on this example, you get the long dead, but you also get an entire normal nation attached to it. You are still an Amorian Roman nation. You have a respectable troop lineup. You have an oh shit button in the form of your gladiators. Your sacreds are not very good, but you have them, and you have a respectable mage corps. Let's break down some of those elements a little bit more. The army is good. The army allows you to expand a little bit without skeletons. Hastati, Principe, with standards, are good troops, and you have capable leaders. The Legatus Legionis is a 120 leadership commander. You get 80 leadership in the Centurion, so you have formations. The Retarii and Gladiators are important because you're combining a scalability mechanic in the form of Scalarian Cultists, so everyone wants to kill you quickly because they know if they leave you alone, you're going to make infinite skeletons. But if they attack you early, you can dump all the extra gold that you have into these emergency troops and fight off early rushes. Gladiators and Retarii hit hard. 22 pierce damage and a net will kill a lot of quite expensive elite stuff, which makes a rush harder to pull off. So your troops help you expand, and they help fend off rushes, and you'll be able to maintain a reasonable conventional army. They have a symbiotic relationship with the Scalarian Cultists because what undead can't kill, the conventional troops probably can, and the conventional troops probably don't need to be as many in number because of the skeletons, which means you can save gold, which you can spend on infrastructure, which you can turn on into more skeleton production. Can you see how that feeds into itself? The other thing is the Scalarian Mage Corps is interesting. It's interesting, and yet I would still call it pretty top-notch. The reason is, it is one of the most limited path pools in the game. You've got exactly 2 recruitable mages. One of them is capital only, one of them is not. The Thaumaturg is an Astral 1, Death 1, Holy 2. The Grand Thaumaturg is an Astral 2, Death 2, some elemental random in there, Holy 3. What does this mean? It means that you are a Death Communion nation. The thing about that is that Death Communions are freaking strong. There is a lot that you can do with Death Magic on a battlefield, from Shadow Blasting Evocations to the classic, I have a million skeletons, so I'm going to put up Darkness and Rigor Mortis, and let the skeletons do the killing, and let the summons do the killing. I have access to death boosting because I have death 3 randoms, which lets me get all the way up to D4. I have a couple of randoms that might even hit D5. I've probably got access elsewhere. I'm great. I have the ability to do Holy Communion too. I'm already got Holy 3 leaders, but my ordinary Thaumaturgs are Holy 3 if they lead Communions too. So if I want to smite or pull anything off like that, or if I want to use the holy buffs for my undead because I have the Scalarian/Lemur holy magic buffs for undead units, which make long dead even better, then I've got that. You don't have diversity, sure, but you don't need many Grand Thaumaturgs at the head of Communions to have access to all of the air, water, astral, or death magic you might need. Now, make no mistake, as Scalaria, you will cherish indies. You can't easily make crystal items, you can't easily magically diversify, but you can go a long freaking way on Death Astral, because the communions will set you free. Is it the best mage core in the game? No, but it's a decent one, and this separates you from Lemur. A sacred researcher in a magic dominion will give you respectable research, whereas Lemur will not. You'll be able to research spells, and as much as this is not the most efficient research or the fastest research in the game, the gold savings that come from being able to replace some of your conventional army with skeleton hordes can be translated into more mages in the form of more forts. You also have a few side buffs and tweaks, like you have assassins that you can gear out later on. You don't really have the paths to make that worthwhile, but overall, Scalaria has the tools to survive the early game. As long as they don't focus too much on the skeletons, as long as they remember that they are a diverse nation with multiple threat vectors, and then has the ability to scale into a horrific undead wrecking ball that can take literally thousands of units worth of casualties a turn and not care. That's Scalaria, and Scalaria is horrifying. There is a post on the forums, actually there's a thread on the Steam forums, where people are debating whether Scalaria is a meh nation or whether it's pretty good. Scalaria is in my top 3. There it is. Moving on. Well, for a nation with no units and commanders, Lemuria is pretty good. No, they do. They just don't display on the screen. So we had to jump into a game for this one. Let's talk about Lemuria. Lemuria is Scalaria. It's Scalaria later on. So congratulations, Scalaria. Of the top 3 nations in the game, you are 2 of them. First, before you fucked up and opened the soul gates and got everyone killed, letting all the spirits return from the underworld. And then after you did that, you were still pretty freaking badass. Let's talk about Scalaria. What makes them amazing? Quick background for those of you who don't understand how Scalaria works. Scalaria is a conventional popkill nation. It is, in many ways, like Middle Age Lemur. It has a dominion that kills population relatively quickly, but it's different in a number of other ways. It has a completely different suite of commanders. It produces fewer units. Those units, instead of being conventional undead, are ghosts. Ghost legionaries specifically, who are different in so many ways from their conventional undead colleagues. And then they have a completely different set of summons. So let's talk about what makes what makes Lemuria particularly dangerous, and I think deserving of the top 3. So, a nation to be powerful needs to be strong in the early game, it needs to have a middle and late game plan, it needs to have some good tricks, it needs to have a way to avoid being rushed down. And Lemuria, barring a few very specific counters, has all of those things. So Lemuria's army, the ghosts, the free spawn ghosts, will chew through independence like nobody's business. These things have human levels of hit points, but also have ethereal. What they don't have is protection, but with decent defense skill and ethereal, they will survive an awful lot of things. They also have relatively hard-hitting magical weapons, and most indies don't have the MR in order to resist all of this extra damage, because an MR check will halve the damage from ethereal weapons. Overall, though, Lemurian ghosts will absolutely chew their way through the expansion phase of the game. There are very few indie types that can deal with them. Lemurian ghosts have some weaknesses. So, for example, if you border Late Age Atlantis, they will rush you, because you can barely hurt them and they can slaughter you. That's what I'm talking about in terms of specific counters. But other than that, even with this new salt vulnerability thing that they brought in, ghosts are good troops, and they will experience much lower attrition than Lemurian troops will in the process. One thing I'll add, because I'm about to talk about what scales Lemuria needs, one thing I hadn't said about Scalaria is that unlike the other nations I describe, it can benefit from really good scales because it doesn't need a bless to be in the top 3. Lemuria, however, probably does benefit from a bless, but being a pop kill, it doesn't really need a huge amount. One thing, however, it does need is magic. It needs magic scales, because what Lemuria has that Lemur doesn't is a hope and a prayer of being relevant in terms of research. because it's likely to have Magic 3 rather than Drain 3. Why? Because an awful lot of Lemuria's Mage Core, which it summons, the Thaumaturgs, the Grand Thaumaturgs, the Consuls, etc., have magic power, which improves their stats in magic scales. And beyond that, its researchers often have magically attuned researcher, which means they get double effect from magic scales. So, we've got a Lemur Thaumaturg here, don't we? Yep, good. So this is a Lemur Thaumaturg. This is, I believe, 20 death gems, so relatively steep. And for this, in Magic 3, I am getting 17 research. That's not bad, considering it's not I don't need to go get a Skull Mentor, which would give me 12 research for half as much, but wouldn't give me a Mage as part of the deal. And the Mage is ethereal, has lots of hit points, has very high statistics, is a useful combat caster who I can send out, and I don't need construction in order to get it. Your lowest level researcher, let's just quickly make one. Let's just make a Lemur Acolyte. So this is the 11 gem commander. Where'd he go? Here he is. 11 gems is getting me 13 research. That is more efficient than Skull Mentor boosters in these magic scales. They're basic, and you get a Mage for it. So you'll never create Skull Mentors as Lemuria. Now, is that good research? No, because you have to spend death gems to get your research. But it's better than Ermor, and it's good enough. It is good enough research. So you have the ghosts who are tremendously dangerous. You have a decent researchable Mage Core. And then you have to think about what sort of combat magic they can cast. Well, the Grand Lemurs. I might have to jump into the mod inspector, actually. Give me a second, and I will show you just how diverse and powerful a Lemurian Mage spread can get. Does this look familiar? It should look familiar because it's basically Scalaria all over again. But I continue to assert that this is acceptable magic diversity. This gives you access to Wind of Death. It gives you access to the Stygian Path, which is the Water Death cross path. You've got Astral in there, and you've got lots and lots of death on a heavy. The Grand Lemur is a heavy Mage chassis, even though he's size 2, supported by the Lemur Thaumaturg. What makes these really good? Well, there's a couple of things here. The first is that you've got more hit points than a human, which makes them hard to knock off in the first place. They're ethereal, which protects them from a lot of things that would otherwise knock them off. They have magic power, which means that they can actually have really high stats in magic. This is defense skill 20 on this guy, and he's got a life drain 0 attack. This is not a soft mage if you get in there. Even if you get into the communion and start attacking them, you're going to have a bad time. And then even if you don't have a bad time, even if you succeed, you're now dealing with someone who has a cold aura, but above all, is immortal. The Grand Lemurs, the big center point mages, expensive as they are for Scalaria, are immortal. And if you can't think of the applicability of an immortal Wind of Death caster, or an immortal Wailing Winds caster, or an immortal Battlefield Wipe caster, bone grinding, you name it, these guys are obnoxious. Because what is suicide for them is in fact just a quick trip to like the underworld convalescence home, followed by re-emergence in Lemuria's capital. So up until the point where you take Lemuria's capital, these guys are just going to be a pain in your neck. They can also cast battlefield-wide holy spells. They can use apostasy, but so can the Thaumaturgs in so can the Thaumaturgs in Communion. But boosted up, these guys are obnoxious, and it doesn't take many of them to wreck stacks in a big way. And at magic resistance 18, morale 18, you're not dealing with them easily. Soul Slay is a natural solution to Immortals, but with an basic level of MR protection, MR 21-22 should be the baseline for Grand Lemurs. And then they shouldn't be on the battlefield for too long while they're dropping their suicide spells. It's more so like if you're killed on retreat, while retreating, or you have nowhere to retreat and you're cut off, you're still going to trigger Immortal and appear back where you were. So the Grand Lemur means there's a lot of middle and late game mage power to Lemuria. But that's not in and of itself enough to make a nation one of the top 3. You've got free spawn, extremely valuable chaff. You've got a decent immortal mage core. And then you have this guy. What's special about this guy? Well, let's have a look. So this is a Lemur Consul, 25 death gems. Bear in mind, Wraith Lords, as I talk through this guy, that the Wraith Lord is a relatively high conjuration summon. Conj 7, I want to say. And costs 40 death gems. The Lemur Consul is Tech 0. You can summon these from the start of the game. It has 33 hit points, 19 protection, attack skill 16, defense skill 16, without holding a shield. So this is just flat defense. Magic power 1. So in your Dominion, this defense skill goes up to 19. We're getting into elf territory. The attack skill goes up to 19. Beyond ordinary elf territory. The protection is 19. Soft Olm territory. Cool. 30 morale so you won't rout him off. What else has he got? Well, he's ethereal. Your elvish thugs aren't ethereal. Wraith Lords are, which is why I make the comparison. So 33 hit points, ethereal, high defense, protection. So you have to get through the ethereal. So in order, I think you have to get through the defense, then you have to get through the ethereal, then you have to get through the protection in order to hurt the 33 hit point base. That's pretty heavy. What more can you do for me, Perun? Well, it's sacred, so you can slap a bless on these guys. And that bless can do things like give them undead regen if you want to, give them a lot more hit points, or more appropriately, maybe we stack this attack skill way high, because it's already going to be 19. Why would we do that? Well, because if we give this guy a pike, he's going to start repelling freaking everything around him. He is going to be circling the proverbial wagons, moving at 1 billion miles an hour as he twitchily fends off entire armies with an enchanted pike. Because you can easily push this attack skill right up there. Not bad. Not bad at all. And he's immortal. Like the Wraith Lord. And he has fear. And he has a cold aura. I'm going to stop now, but you get the point. So, this is an army-killing repel thug. Recruitable at level 0, who is immortal, and thus if you lose him to anything other than a Soul Slay, which he won't suffer from because he's MR 17, and by the time people have Soul Slay, you can have ways to make them more resistant to magic. So, this will repel entire armies of ordinary troops with even a modicum of gear. Some really basic enchanted gear is enough to make them very formidable. They have the cold and the fear, which means that while they repel everyone, they don't have to kill the enemy army to win. The cold aura will freeze them, which makes them even more safe, and the fear aura will eventually rout them off. While the ethereal, the repel, the armor, the hit points, the bless, all of it keeps this guy alive. You start with a death gem income, enough to make one of these every 2 turns. It's not the only thing you should do, but you can get a couple of Lemur Consuls out early. And they can handle a lot of troops, a lot of sacred rushes, a lot of things that are coming for you. The Lemur Consul is an important tool that augments and adds to what the ghosts bring you as a nation. I'm going to jump back into the game now to talk about another element that makes Lemuria exceptionally powerful. Alright, we're back. So we've talked about Lemur Consuls, the immortal, recruitable, level 0, ethereal, fear, cold, sacred thugs. Cool. We've talked about how you have a reasonable mage core, but you have a top-level mage who is able to be obnoxious, a teleporting troll immortal unit that can cast important stuff, while having really good stats and being quite survivable. Like, seriously, why does this mage have 23 defense? Someone feel free to tell me. In fact, I'm pretty sure that with the Bless, I could make these guys thugs. They're too expensive to be thugs, but with the Bless, I could do it. That's unnecessary. What goes beyond that? Because so far, I'm mostly describing sort of a composite of Urmor and Scalaria, and you have to wonder what makes Lemuria so much better than Urmor. Are the ghosts really that much better? Well, here's the thing. Ghosts are not mindless, which means ghosts have siege defense. Same as a human. Normal Lemurian undead, they don't. They have a tiny, tiny fraction of that siege defense. And yet ghosts don't eat. They don't eat. They have siege defense. And Lemuria's dominion kills the population of the land on which it lives. Which means Lemuria is not a nation of ghosts. Lemuria is not a nation of thugs. Well, it is of all those things, but above all, Lemuria is a nation of forts. Lemuria is a nation of defense. Lemuria is a nation of turning every single battlefield into the worst days at the Somme circa First World War. Because when Lemuria sets up a fort and temples it, the resource they care about is the death gems. It's the gems they're getting to power their economy, and the temple will produce gems. They'll need gold, but only to produce more forts. That temple and that fort will then create undead, which will stack, and all else being equal, fill the walls while the curse kills the land around it. You won't want to invade Lemuria. You know you have to because they're dangerous, but you don't want to because their land is freaking worthless. You burn down the temples, which generate death gems, which are the only worthwhile thing about them, and that's only for whoever gets the capital, which is awkward because you probably need a coalition to beat them. Lemuria gets into a zone, drives the supplies down to 0, and stacks the fort defense high, using its ghosts. So you have to bring in enough supply items to feed enough units to break into the fort, and then defeat the ghosts and mages that are inside. While you are sieging, unless you're one-turn popping, a smart Lemuria is teleporting in grand lemurs from its capital. And they will be there when you storm. Or they'll be sallying while you knock down the walls. And they will be hitting you with magic and assailing you and being shit. And when you storm the fort, you will kill them. And they will respawn. And having taken that fort, you will be greeted by 2 more forts in the next 2 provinces, because Lemuria doesn't need resources. Lemuria just needs to fort every freaking province. Fort, temple, and let it die, and you will step onto that next fort and you will fight those same grand lemurs all over again, as once again you crack open a fort wondering why you do this to yourself to take land that is worth nothing. Lemuria is probably the most cancerous nation in the game. They can be beaten. Nations that start with magic weapons and have a defense against their tools early on can rush them and bring them down. Late Age Atlantis is a version that commonly gets cited because they can win the early field battles. They're not great at sieges, but they can kill Lemuria before most forts go up. Calums is another option because you've got and Raga too, because you have flying magical weapons. So flying magical weapons are great in 2 ways. They kill the ghosts and all the ethereal units, and because you're a bird, you crack forts much faster, which is one of Lemuria's great defenses. I'm not saying Lemuria can't be countered, but they're a right pain. And playing them against most foes is playing on easy mode, because you need to have the exact tools necessary to counter this nation. Because they have the interlocking combination of an army that makes the early game good. They've got good thugging options, functional mages, and they have tremendous abilities to deter aggression in the form of their popkill, and their tremendous defensive capabilities in the form of their ability to fort 0 population provinces with non-negligible siege defense. Lemuria is cancer, but Lemuria is excellent, and I'm proud to have them in my top 3. Look, it's a blast down memory road, but you knew it was coming. Rounding out my list of top 3 nations in Dominions, and my nomination for quite possibly still, even after its nerfs, possibly the strongest nation in Dominions 5, maybe because I played it, is the middle-aged nation of Nazca. An avian necrocracy ruled by mummies, ultimately financially unsustainable, doomed for failure by the time of the Late Age, but you wouldn't know it from the power it brings to bear in the Middle Age. Nazca is superb. It is superb because it brings a variety of factors, which I'll talk through. It brings sacreds, it brings magic diversity, mobility, scalability, forgiveness, and a way to get around its limited economy, which I think come together to make it probably the most powerful nation in the game. I say that noting something. There is a window of vulnerability for Nazca, and it lasts up until Nazca gets Conjuration 3. That's not a big window of vulnerability for Nazca, but a Nazca for the first few turns of the game will be crippled by terrible hell scales and a not so good troop lineup that it can't mass produce because it has shitty scales. But beyond that, it will thrive. Let's break this down. What makes Nazca good in order? Well, let's start with what it can recruit. Most nations look first to their troops, and Nazca as a sacred nation looks first to its ordinary sacreds. And the answer is, they're okay. The Condor Warrior and the Sun Guard are okay. They're okay sacreds. The one thing I will say is the Sun Guard has a built-in triple damage to undead and demon weapon, which has niche usefulness in destroying certain sorts of units. In particular, a lot of people's preferred late game thug units, things like Wraith Lords, are undead. Tartarians are undead. Liches, undead. Demons are the tool of Blood Nations to scale up, so your Sun Guards are a useful late game counter. But the real early game sacred unit for Nazca isn't the Condor Warrior, it's the Condor. And let's see if I can find a stack of those guys in this game. Where were all my Condors at this point in the game? I don't know. Come on, I had Condors in just about every army. Here we go. Here's a Condor. This is a Condor. Condors are summoned at Conjuration 3 for air gems. Condors are sacred, have decent skills, shock resistant, flying, stealthy, have siege bonus of 1, so they have 4 siege strength, which is okay. But the main issue with them is scalability. Even though they've adjusted the Conjuration spell, Summon Condors, you can still get large numbers of Condors early game if you're able to find some air gems, which gives you a way to get around the restriction that you have on recruiting sacreds in your capital, who you may not be able to have many of if you want to have a true Hellbless. The Condor gives you large numbers of extremely high map move sacreds, who have 2 built-in attacks, which means that when they take a weapon bless, that gets applied to both. I believe that is so. While having decent morale and being stealthy. This is a strong sacred arm which enables you, once you have the Condors, to effectively rush most people. Most people in the game can be rushed by a Condor Hellbless. In doing so, you break the early rules on sacred scalability, because even the people who can recruit sacreds anywhere need to make forts in order to do so. You have a window in which your awake pretender will be summoning more Condors than the recruit anywhere sacred nations will be recruiting their sacreds over the forts that they have created. Because an awake Hellbless incarnate god will get your research to Conjuration 3 and then handle the casting as well, which is pretty freaking impressive for a nation. In and of itself, probably not enough to make a nation an absolute winner. So, let's move on. Let's go back. So you've seen these sacreds, you're like, they're okay. Well, mage cores are important too. And Nazca's got a fantastic mage lineup. Your recruit anywhere mages, as well as these humans over here, which give you just this little bit of diversity. So remember they exist, but they're not important to why Nazca's amazing. You have sort of okay priest, and then the Huron. The Huron is a good mage. It's expensive, but it's a sacred mage, so halve upkeep, and it is Death Earth, which is a good combination with randoms in air, earth, and astral. This means you have your air death, who are your sort of Wailing Winds, Wind of Death Hurons. You have Astral Hurons, who are your expensive small communions. You have the Hurons who can bring Earth in. You have a little higher Earth, and they're probably your research monkeys. It's a mobile skelly spammer. it is a mobile communion mage. I'm saying 22 map move is very mobile. This is a good standard form mage. You can build a nation on the Huron Priest. The capital only mages are also very, very good. You have a recruitable, high mobility, or Holy 3, who on a lot of nations you'd want to thug, but the reality is you don't because they're too valuable and you have better things to be doing with your time. Fire, air, and then a small chance of a random, and Holy 3, high leadership. This gives you the ability to mass bless those huge piles of sacreds that you'll be summoning. Supported by, of course, the magic of the Koya, who give you Earth, Astral, Death, and then a small random that can possibly include a couple of different paths. So this is the better mage, very expensive chassis, but still sacred, so still half upkeep, which is important when you have trash scales, which gives you good additional magic option. In particular, Koyas are crystal forgers. But wait, there's more. There's the Royal Monkey, who is quite possibly the most expensive recruitable thing in the game, while giving you 2 fire, 2 air, 2 earth, 2 astral, 2 death, Holy 3, a small 10% random, and then having innate spellcaster 2, which means they put out even more spells. Not half bad. The extra addition to this is where Nazca's scalability goes a little bit nuts. Royal Monkey can reanimate undead. One of the things they can reanimate, even better if you give them a Huaka headdress, which is a unique Nazcan item, which I've got here, is you can reanimate, call Suppliers. And by calling Suppliers, you generate these guys. Suppliers are storm flying and thus amphibious, ethereal, high statistic, sacred birds. And with an appropriate bless, they're obnoxious. Nazca can stack up a large number of Royal Monkey in its capital, if it's able to rush people and pay for this, because there are only 2 recruitment points to get the Royal Monkeys if you can afford them, and thus build up this gigantic generation pool of additional sacreds to the point where you can stamp out a new army of flying sacreds every turn. The flying part there leads into a mobility point, but I'm not going to go mobility yet because we haven't finished scalability. You have Condors, who are scalable based on gems. You have Suppliers, who are scalable based on these expensive mages in your capital. So let's call it gold and capital turns. And then you have the freaking Hatun Runa. This unit is pretty shit. This is a Hatun Runa. It is a slave unit. It is a low morale, low magic resistance, moderately hard hitting 11 hit point bird. It's a shitty bird troop. And you can produce them in insane quantities. The trick with Nazca, so the way you do this is you recruit Apu. Apu costs 1 recruitment point and 40 gold. So in your capital, on your first turn, you can pump out 2 of them. Then you get them killed. When Apu die, they become this thing. This is a Monkey. Monkeys normally cost, let's check, 140 gold to research. So by sacrificing a 40 gold commander, you get a 140 gold mage commander. You'll never actually recruit these. I wish they weren't recruitable. I get why they are, but they're a mistake. They're a trap. Don't make them. The reason the gold has to be that high is because it means then that even being sacred, they cost 56 gold a year to upkeep. But that doesn't matter because they can capture slaves. And that means you're capturing a couple of dice worth of these Hatun Runa every turn. Sure, you might create some unrest, but Hatun Runa are amazing patrollers because they're flying, high combat speed, decent protection birds that cost basically nothing. A Hatun Runa has a base recruitment cost of 5 gold and then is hard for being a slave. They cost 2 gold a year. You can have 1 billion, and I did. You can see there that score graph down there is Ermor. And I could have taken it a lot further. Scaleria can produce 2 Scalarian cultists per turn who can produce 3 long dead per turn each. You can produce 2 Apu per turn without a temple who can then produce more than that worth of Hartoon Runa per turn. Is the Hartoon Runa better than a skeleton? Well, we can fight over this. Skeletons don't rout. Skeletons are slightly more effective warriors. Skeletons are much less effective as siege chaff. A Hartoon Runa is a 2 siege strength on attack and 1 siege strength on defense. And they're amazing patrollers. If I had to choose, is the Scalarian Cultist better than the Mulkey? Yes, the Scalarian Cultist is better, but the Mulkey is bloody good, and Hartoon Runa are amazing. And you can see I was able to patrol almost every province. So you have no gold as Nazca, but you have the ability to build armies out of these big blobs of chaff, strengthened by a core of sacreds who you also didn't pay gold for, 1 commander who blesses them, and that's an effective fighting force for a lot of the game. You can scale out of control. As you grow bigger, you can mass produce you can capture more slaves to produce more slave armies. You have the gems to summon more condors. You have the gold to support more Sapphire summoning. What is the conventional economy? You may never create conventional troops past a certain point in the game because you just don't need to, other than you cap only sacreds. And that's without being popkill or anything dumb like that. So, sacreds, scalability. The slave factor, which helps keep your upkeep down. Everything being sacred or a slave helps save you a little bit from your own upkeep problems, which you would otherwise have because you have shitty scales. You have good magic diversity in a way because you have access to quite a few paths across your different mages. You have a good serviceable battle mage. And then to add insult to freaking injury, you have built-in Twiceborn on all of your commanders. If a Hartoon Runa dies, it gets reanimated as a Mulkey and continues. Now it can continue researching. Sure, so you get a research mage, or you can send it out again. It's not as mobile, so I didn't use them, because you need some mages researching or site searching. But it becomes a reanimator priest at home who can either reanimate, or can continue researching, or can site search, whatever. You don't lose mages permanently. Your capital mages become freaking Royal Mulkey when they die. They bond with one another, stick together, and become one of these guys, and you can put a hat on them and they can make Sapphires. Twiceborn is a spell that costs gems, and every Nazcan commander, pretty much, except for the humans, has it built in. Unless it's already a mummy. So your troops are completely disposable, because you levy them. Your sacreds are... there's so many of them. They're capable, and they're almost disposable. And the whole offensive unit of the army moves like flyers. And that strategic mobility allows you to respond quicker, it allows you to get places quicker, it allows you to fight raiding wars more effectively. You have disposable raiding forces, which is great when they're super mobile. You have access to stealth offensive units by getting condors, pairing them up with Inca, and putting a Shade Mail Halberdier, which you can forge natively, on your commanders, and you can start elfing people with sacred armies. There's very little to complain about on Nazca. And if it all goes wrong and you are under attack, Nazca can stick... This is probably a good example over here. This is 1,570 siege power, so half that. Almost 800 siege defense. Stick that in a fort and tell them to come at you, bro. Because that's not actually costing you that much. They're just Hartoon Runa. And I guarantee you that whatever is standing on top of that fort bringing siege strength costs way more than those slaves did. They probably cost gold or gems to make, and they cost gold or gems to keep there, and they cost supply items to keep there, and they will slowly edge through those walls. And while they have a big valuable force locked down on one of your forts, you can be flying in reinforcements, you can be raiding, you're stamping out sacreds. you're responding. So no, you're not a popkill. You're not Lemuria, and you can't say my land is worth nothing, don't invade me. But Nazca's ability past very early on in the game to respond to aggression is tremendous. And their ability to unleash aggression is peerless. So because they have good sacreds and mages, because they have an amazing combination of scalability factors, their troops are scalable, their sacreds are scalable, because they are mobile, because they are kings of the offensive and defensive siege, because they're super forgiving in the form of having built-in Twiceborn, which unlocks a bunch of abilities. Because I have played them and they are dear to my heart, I nominate Nazca as one of the top 3 nations in Dominions, and in my humble opinion, quite possibly the best. Certainly counterable, certain builds will destroy Nazca, certainly coalitionable. But if you're looking for a nation that I'm going to elevate above all others because of what it has to offer you, I'm going to say Nazca feels like playing cheat mode. I loved playing them in a way, but this is a powerful nation. Make no mistake, and I think it deserves its spot in the top 3. Now, with that said, I actually think this video has gone fairly long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chop it. I'm going to say these are my top 3. What I'm instead is going to talk about some honorable mentions rather than going into what I was going to do, which was the bottom nations. I'll make that another video. Let's talk about some honorable mentions quickly, and why they didn't quite make it into my top 3. First of the 3 of my honorable mentions, because I know they're many people's favourites. This is Ashdod. Ashdod has some of the most terrifying sacreds in the game, in the form of the Sheshai and Ahiman Anakites. The Anakim are indeed tremendous warriors. With an appropriate bless, they hit hard, they hit fast, they're hard to kill, they can put down PD, and they can rush people. The people of Ashdod have the ability to rush and kill other nations early on in the game. Later on, the Adonim, properly geared, are tremendous combatants. Very, very, very dangerous. And you have some magic ability spread in through the Talmai Elders, the Zamzamites, and you have a sort of a research. You have a decent research mage in the form of the Rephaite Sage, who gives you 2 in one of 3 paths. The problems I have with Ashdod are manifold. The reason they don't get into the top bracket is, first of all, it's a scalability problem. Their draws, the Anakim and the Adonim, so their thuggable / SCable commander and their cap-only sacreds, are cap-only. The number of units that Ashdod will be getting per turn, the number of sacreds Ashdod will be getting per turn from clearing their cap circle is about as good as they will ever get. Now, they do have some summonables later on. They do have some ways to break into a gem-based number, but in terms of the ability to compound and scale their power, it is nothing like Scalaria, it is not like Lemuria, and it is not like Nazca. They also struggle, I think, a little bit to broaden their threat and also to disincentivize movement. If Ashdod commits to launching an offensive somewhere, the temptation on someone else to jump and lock down their capital so they can't recruit more Anakim is there. It's not Nazca, where the population's all dead and the provinces are worthless. It's not Scalaria, where there's probably skeletons everywhere anyway. It's not Nazca, where the siege defense might be 800. Siege defense might be 800, and they can levy new armies every turn, and technically from anywhere. Like, both Scalaria and Nazca can relocate where they're summoning their new forces from. There's no equivalent to the built-in Twice-spawns or immortality that we saw on Nazca and Lemuria. Anakim is scary. Ashdod is scary. Ashdod's late-game summons can be scary. But they don't have the blood of their early or late-age incarnations. They don't have the same scalability mechanics, and the army outside of the Sacreds is okay, but will also get eaten alive by, say, for example, middle-aged Olm. Couple that with a mage lineup which is not by no stretch domineering, and I think you've got a nation which is too much of a 1/2 trick pony to really be in the top 3 despite its tremendous popularity. to a similar but lesser extent, Raga's in here too. Raga's Jayadans, I believe is how that's said, although I stand to be corrected, are tremendous, mobile, killy, amazing sacreds. These things mulch indies, guarantee that you'll win your first war. The Jayadans or Jayadans, not sure the shape of the A sound there, are tremendous. They're great. And they're backed up by a pretty decent average troop lineup. Savaran Guard and Savaran Cataphracts are good. They're good units. You've got a little bit of magic weapons for dealing with Lemuria, and then your Fire Mage lineup is actually decent. Karapans are okay researchers / hunters. Dasters, you'll see. Having blood gives you a built-in scalability like mechanism, and also functions as like a baby communion. Blood gives you a scalability all of its own, right? Because you can hunt and summon demons to a much greater extent than you could just using gems or just using gold, because you can choose to burn down province population to get even more blood slaves quicker. But at the same time, I'm not sure that this mage lineup and that the level of blood that we have justifies displacing Infinite Skeleton Scalaria, the immortal spam and fort defense of Lemuria, and it certainly doesn't justify replacing Nazca's magic diversity, sacred scalability, mobility, built-in twice-borns, like all those factors. Raga is a nation I would give serious props to. This is a powerful nation. It can be played really, really well. It's got a strong opener. It's got a strong middle. It has a late game plan. It is a good country, but I do not think it knocks off the others for top slot. And then there's a nation that really made me think. There we are. Let's get that full scheme working properly. Ubar is a new kid on the block. Ubar is also the only early age nation that I considered putting into this list. Ubar has a lot going for it, and I think they might be a victim of just lack of familiarity on my part as to why they're not a stronger contender for their place. Let's talk about what they have going for them and then what they were missing. Ubar has a way of running over people early in the form of a recruitable, stealthy, ethereal, invisible basic troop, the Jin Warrior. These are expensive, sure, but they have ethereal protection, stats, they hit hard, and they have everything you need in order to keep them alive. In particular, unseen. This trait here means that if you don't have Spirit Sight, hitting them is going to be basically, well, it's going to be very, very, very difficult for most things to accomplish without lots and lots and lots of attacks. And they have the same magic power trick that you saw in Lemuria's units, which means they benefit greatly inside of a Ubar's magic dominion. So they have a troop that lets them expand early. They have some good summonables that they can get out. The Gulls, or Ghouls, who are also available to M.A. Nabar, are regenerating 2 shape, so they have a wounded shape unit that can be summoned 4 blood slaves. Stealthy, resistant, damaging, Spirit Sight, solid. Like, they're solid. Later on, Ubar gets access to a whole bunch of stuff that becomes available, including one of the best, one of the most expensive and most powerful units, or commanders rather, in the game. You get recruitable Ifrit Sultans. These only appear once the god wakes up and the sight changes, but this is Fire 4, Air 2, Earth 1, randoms. It is, geez, like where do you start? 15, 14, 53 hit points. It's going to have slots so you can armor it and get past its protection. Resistant to cold, -5, but is resistant to shock, heat aura, fire shield, firepower, magic power. So a heat 3, magic 3 Ifrit Sultan is a tremendously skilled combatant. It is unseen. and ethereal, which means that without the proper gear, this is basically immune to being stabbed with stabby things. You'll want magic to kill it, or a very carefully designed counter thug. Held back, I think, by the fact that it is a 6 recruitment point, 635 gold, capital only unit. I think it's good. I don't think you build a nation off it. The other mages are good, but I think fire is overrated. You do, however, get you get the ability to break yourself into blood. So you have the Gulars, or however you say that, which you can get at blood 5, I think? Yes, blood 5. It doesn't take much to get access to what you need to get a couple of these and get a blood economy going. It won't be a huge blood economy, but you can do it. I don't think you have any recruitable blood elsewhere. My notes say you don't have easy one. Yeah, the Shaitan has a random and is the future cap only set. So you're not huge on the blood, and I said that limited scalability. So you have to wait for your best stuff. You have a good early trick. You have some nice summons. You've got some powerful late game stuff. The summonable Marids, the recruitable Ifrit Sultans are just, they're badass. They're absolute badasses. And if something doesn't have a counter to Unseen, then you can probably run them over with Djinn Warriors. Like, a big enough group of Djinn Warriors will probably slap people even who have magic weapons. And you may compel people to take Spirit Sight in order to counter you. My problem is twofold. Firstly, I don't think the package overall in a bigger game is as valuable as what Nazca, Scalability, Lemuria offer, because, again, of this scalability problem. In a one-on-one or in a blitz, where the enemy does not know who they are fighting, I think Ubar is one of the most powerful picks. Because if you don't know to pick Spirit Sight magic weapons, then Djinn will run over you. Or later on, the commanders with Unseen will run over you. They'll elf you, and then they'll hit you in the face, and you won't be able to touch them. In a game where people know Ubar's in, you might see more Spirit Sight. And Spirit Sight magic weapons takes these from being good units to being very questionable units. Certainly nothing like the other early age sacreds you compare them to, like a Vanhir. A Vanhir with Spirit Sight would just eat Djinn Warriors for breakfast, and then like dishonor the corpse. It would be that one-sided. The other point is that in a longer game, cap-only units and expensive cap-only mages and limitedly scalable summons are not a recipe to win the game. Lemuria's ghosts will replicate more and more as the battle goes on, and the number of ghost forts they have in a network will just continue to expand. The dead zone will become harder and harder to penetrate in a meaningful way, especially since you need to get to the capital to knock them out. Scalaria's skeletons will scale to the point of insanity, as will Nazca's slaves and sacreds if you let them. So Ubar just doesn't have the same tool. It has a disincentive on being attacked in the form of its troops, as long as they don't have the specific counter. But hey, Lemuria is counterable too. But over the longer term in a bigger game, it's not as broken, it's not as busted as the reigning champions. So I'm happy to take feedback on what I'm missing about Ubar. To me, it seems like a very strong nation, a very frustrating nation. I'd love to play it in like a blitz, especially if people don't know it's coming. It might force people to make suboptimal decisions on their blesses to be ready for you, but that doesn't help you win. It just makes life more annoying for them. So for all those reasons, Ubar is definitely in my honourable mention column, but staying outside the top 3. Anyway, this was a relatively long video. I talked quite for a long time even about the honourable mentions. Happy to take feedback on this before I prepare the bottom 3 video. And if you have any other factors in general that you think I should consider as part of the middle and late age tier listing, happy to take account of them. Those will go into less detail about each individual nation, but they will explain the methodology and a little bit about why each nation is where it is. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. See you guys next time.